everyone. We are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. As ever, I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
And we're here continuing our Black History Month celebration, doing weekly videos about art that has been produced around the Black experience, mostly focusing here in America, but expanding to the global Black experience as well. And so today we're talking about specifically the movie Hidden Figures, but also other historical dramas that center or don't center around Black people and the Black experience. So this is one of those ideas that was born out of a discussion between Dr. Kristen and I talking about, I think an article she might have read that talked about the stereotypical roles for Black people.
It was a Twitter feed. Yeah, it was a Twitter thing. Yeah.
Go. You explain it because you read the Twitter feed and you told me about it.
Okay, so it was a Twitter. This was right around when the nominations came out, and Cynthia Murray was the only person of color for the Oscar nominations.
Right. Oh yeah. And she was nominated for
being Harriet Tubman. And so somebody said, somebody listed. I can dig it up again because it's in your DMs. But like, here's every woman of color who has won an award or been nominated, and they have always been nominated for playing a slave, a servant, or a poor person.
Right. And so we had this long discussion when the nominees came out, and the lack of representation of people of color, including Black people, Black and brown people. Obviously, people of color is a bit bigger than just being Black, but which should be noted. But yeah, the lack of representation of people of color, but even more so of Black people, because there was some representation of Asians and Asian Americans stories in some of the award shows. Parasite did win Best Picture, which is a South Korean film. But yes, particularly in a year where we saw some really strong performances by women of color, Jennifer Lopez in Hustlers.
Yeah, in Hustlers, and Awkwafina in
The Farewell, and one of our dear beloveds, Lupita Nyong'o in Jordan Peele's Us. None of whom were nominated, and the person who was nominated, probably deservedly, I haven't seen Harriet yet, Cynthia Erivo, again for one of those stereotypical roles that we talked about as a slave, a servant, or a poor person. And there's a lot of history that backs this up. I just wrote down what I could think of before we filmed. Roots, The Color Purple, The Help, The Butler. The category that we didn't include is also sports movies. So 42, which is the story of Jackie Robinson. Remember the Titans, The Blind Side, Ali, which I forgot about.
And then there's always exceptions. So like you're listening to them, listing them, I'm sure as we're talking, like obviously Ray is an exception to that.
Yeah. Musicians would probably be another one. Yeah.
And Hidden Figures is an exception. I mean, Taraji P. Henson and Octavia Spencer and Janelle Monáe were praised universally for their roles as three brilliant NASA scientists.
Yeah. And I feel like there's been a couple of page turns in this narrative, like over the history of film. But I feel like really Hidden Figures, which was 2016,
yes,
was one of the biggest ones. Because we're starting to get to a place where we can interrogate these patterns and say, what are we missing? Mm-hmm. Like, what are we overlooking? And are we really centering Black people in these stories? Or, as you said just offline now rather brilliantly, a lot of these stories in the past were about these Black people in their relationship to the white people that they worked with, that they worked for, that were their slave owners, whatever. So, we have Moonlight winning Best Picture, which is not a story about any of those stereotypical things. Fences, what's Viola Davis winning for Fences, which is a
a love story with her and Denzel Washington. Yeah.
Yes, I'm trying to
that they're very poor in that story.
They are very poor in that story. But I'm trying to think of the poet's name because he's from Pittsburgh. The author's name, August Wilson. And so Denzel Washington, that was his first in a line of producing August Wilson plays as films.
Yep.
Which is massive and is going to be phenomenal. And so even though, yes, they were poor in that film, it was a film created by a person of color and like centered around the ideas of Black creatives rather than a white person trying to tell a story about an experience that, you know, they didn't identify with. So
and that's an important piece though. Like this carries on a little bit from our Color Purple conversation in last week. Like I think about the movie Amistad, for instance, was not going to get made without Steven Spielberg.
Right.
The movie Color Purple was not going to get made without Steven Spielberg.
Right.
And so there is and Taylor, when we talked to Taylor Hackford, right, in the yeah. He talked about like, right, I'm a white guy and I'm the director, but I need to make sure that the writer is a Black person if we're telling a Black story and like all these kind of things. So this is a puzzle in which there's a lot of parts for a lot of people to play.
Yeah.
And as long as we are serving the character in their most authentic or story or whatever, in their truest, fullest sense of themselves, a lot of us can play a lot of different roles in that. So this isn't Dr. Aaron and I trying to limit anything, but simply pointing out different ways to use different voices.
Yeah, and there's something really important to be said about allyship and what that looks like, and how you can be an ally like those directors were, because by recognizing that, you know, inserting yourself into that position of power, using your power, leveraging your power is not a bad thing. It's how you leverage that power and how you bring voices into the room that can be authentic voices of that experience, whatever it is, to recognize your race, in a sense, to recognize your whiteness.
Yep.
And recognize that it is not your experience to tell, and that there are professionals out there that you can bring to the table and elevate using your privilege, which is really, really important.
And then as we fast forward through history, now we have Jordan Peele, who is one of the more powerful people in Hollywood and gets to tell these gorgeous stories.
Yeah. And we have Ava DuVernay, who is a force in leading the way in terms of elevating Black creatives and having Black people make sure that they're like throughout all of her productions. So when she did When They See Us, which was the series for Netflix that came out last year, she wanted, you know, racial equity in terms of representation. Her newest show, Cherish the Day, she has filled with Black creatives in every position, because she has now this power and privilege from her success, and she's, you know, using it to bring other people along with her. And
then on television, we've got Shonda Rhimes, and we cannot talk about creatives or historical folks without talking about Shonda off screen. She's the first like in-house creator at Netflix. And
like she is a powerhouse.
And you look at the stories and the casts and I mean, like Grey's Anatomy told stories that no one else was telling.
Yeah.
How to Get Away with Murder, which you've talked about in a GDD, is telling stories no one else was telling, and with a really wide-ranging creative team. And Shonda's bringing romance back to like even romance back to Netflix. The Bridgertons are coming.
Yes, and one of the things that we talked about, or I talked about in a GDD from last week, was this idea of representation and kind of inserting Black people into stories that were written about white experiences, and how that was done very badly by Barnes & Noble. If you didn't see it's easier to just watch my GDD than for me to explain it. But there are ways that it can be done, I think, really interestingly. And you have Ava's A Wrinkle in Time, in which you know, I haven't read it, but is the race of anyone specified?
No, but because it's British, it's assumed, and this is interesting, but like I've always seen it as white people. Always.
Yeah, which is in some way our own, like, you know, kind of racialized perspectives. But yeah, so the race of the characters in A Wrinkle in Time isn't specified. So what
not that I can remember. So.
Yeah, so what does Ava do? She comes in and she remakes it and hires a whole bunch of actors of color. So it's possible in that sense, especially in sci-fi, like, because there's a lot of historical dramas in which you can't insert a Black woman into Jane Eyre, because that would have never
changed it. I mean, and unless you want to be Lin-Manuel Miranda and do everything
right
like that, you know, then it's different. But there are so many opportunities to make things, like I think about Harry Potter, like when they cast Cursed Child.
Yeah.
And how really everybody was furious that Hermione was going to be played by a Black British actress, and J.K. Rowling's like, I literally never said she was white.
Yeah.
I just said she had out of control hair.
all I said was that she had frizzy hair. That is it. And she just like screen grabbed, as much as we have problems with J.K. Rowling for other reasons.
Oh, and she's, but on this front, she
screen grabbed, like she took a picture of the text and just tweeted it and was like, here's my only description of Hermione as a person. Physical appearance. And it was just her hair. So yeah, there's ways to work around it. There's ways to do it. I know a lot of people were angry when the Bridgerton cast was announced. And one of the principal characters, who is a duke, she cast a Black actor. And everyone was like, well, a Black person never would have been a duke in 1865 or whatever. But the beauty of kind of the way Shonda Rhimes tells stories is she's just like, but I'm imagining a new reality. Like,
but, you know, let's have fun. And just so anyone who doesn't know, the Bridgertons is a series of romance novels that Dr. Aaron and I are in love with, by a woman named Julia Quinn. And Shonda's optioned them and has created an entire series out of this group of siblings who all find their own happily ever afters.
Yeah.
And for sure, Julia Quinn wrote them as white people. For sure. That is clear.
Yeah.
But Julia Quinn is also really excited that Shonda didn't cast all white people.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of the key characters in the novel are people of color, and it's going to be exciting to see Regency. It's Regency, right?
Yeah, it's Regency. Yeah, so it's like early 1800s.
Yeah. Reimagined this way. And like another show that I watched, Harlots, kind of did a really good job of including authentic characters of color. And all of this is to say, like, what we hope to continue to see going forward is just the recognition that humans are humans.
Yep.
And that nobody should be typecast or stereotyped based on their race or their gender or their sexuality or their ability or whatever. And for a long, long time, the systemic racism inherent in our country dictated stereotypical roles for people of color. And if you want to learn more about this, I would really recommend watching the documentary we talked about last week, They Gotta Have Us, which is a good introduction into a lot of these stereotypes, and the history of kind of Black film actors in America anyway. But yeah, hopefully going forward, we see just humans being humans.
I can't wait.
Would be great. Yeah, so that's all I've got, I think.
Yeah, no, that's all I got for now. So we'll see you guys next time.
Next week, yeah, we'll be talking more about Ava DuVernay, because if you haven't noticed, she's one of my heroes, and a little bit more about criminal justice and people of color, and some TV shows and films you should watch. But for now, we'll see you next time.
Can't wait. Bye, guys.
Bye.